My son wrote, "I took the $80,000 from Dad's account before he died. He wanted me to have it, not you." The letter was sitting in a pile of junk mail I hadn't touched in months. Credit card offers addressed to Bernard, coupons for stores we never shopped at, a water bill I'd already paid online. I was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing out my coffee cup, when I decided to finally sort through the stack. Most of it went straight into the recycling bin without a second look. But then I saw Clayton's handwriting on an envelope, and my hand stopped midair. It wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Renee, my daughter, at our old house, the one we'd sold 15 years ago before moving here. Clayton must have used an old address by mistake. The post office forwarded it, like they do, and it ended up in my pile of things I was too tired to deal with. I shouldn't have opened it. It wasn't mine. But something about seeing my son's handwriting on paper — he never writes letters, nobody does anymore — made me curious. Maybe it was a birthday card for his sister that got lost. Maybe it was something sweet I could tease him about later. I turned on the faucet to wash the last dish, and with my other hand, I pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. His handwriting is terrible. Always has been. Even as a kid, his teachers complained about it. "Clayton has good ideas," they'd write on his report cards, "but his penmanship needs work." It never got better. If anything, it got worse with time, the letters getting more cramped and impatient, like he couldn't be bothered to make them legible for anyone but himself. But I've been reading it since he was 6 years old, so I didn't need perfect penmanship to understand every word. Renee, I took the $80,000 from Dad's account before he died. He wanted me to have it. Not you, not Mom. Don't make this into something it isn't. He knew what he was doing. I just helped him do it. Clayton. The water was still running. I remember that because my hands were under it, and I didn't feel the temperature change from warm to cold. I just stood there, reading those 3 sentences over and over, like if I stared long enough, the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. He knew what he was doing. I just helped him do it. Helped. What a word. What a small, innocent word for what he actually did. He wanted me to have it, not you. I don't know how long I stood there. 20 minutes, maybe. The water kept running until my fingers were numb and wrinkled. When I finally turned it off, the house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the living room. I was still holding the letter. The paper had gotten damp at the edges from the steam rising off the sink. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Bernard and I had eaten breakfast together for 46 years. The same table where Clayton used to do his homework while I cooked dinner. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday nights that meant nothing at the time and everything now that they're gone. My name is Vivian. I'm 73 years old. 8 months ago, I buried my husband of 46 years, and apparently, while he was dying, my son was helping himself to our savings.
You know how it is when you lose your husband. You can't think straight. The paperwork sits there for months because you just can't face it. Vivian waited 8 months. Part of her wishes she'd looked sooner. Part of her wishes she never looked at all.
I called the bank the next morning. My voice was steady, which surprised me, because nothing inside me felt steady at all. The woman on the phone was polite, efficient, the way people are when they're following a script. "Mrs. Whitmore, I can see your account information here, but for detailed statements going back that far, you'll need to come in with proper identification. We can print everything for you." "How far back can you go?" I asked. "As far as you need." I needed October. The last month Bernard was conscious enough to recognize my face. The last month before the morphine took him somewhere I couldn't follow. I put on my good coat the next day. The navy one Bernard always said made me look like a senator. I don't know why that mattered. It just felt important to look like someone who should be taken seriously. I drove to the bank alone. Renee offered to come, but I said no. I didn't want witnesses for whatever I was about to find. The branch manager was a young woman named Danielle, couldn't have been older than 35. She had kind eyes and a nervous habit of clicking her pen while she looked at her computer screen. I sat across from her desk, my purse in my lap, my hands folded on top of it like I was waiting for a doctor to deliver test results. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said slowly, and I could tell from her voice that she was seeing something she didn't expect. There were 3 large withdrawals from the joint checking account in October. My stomach tightened. "How large?" She hesitated, looked at her screen again, then back at me. The clicking had stopped completely now. 30,000 on October 3rd, 25,000 on October 11th. Another 25,000 on October 19th. $80,000. Just like the letter said. The numbers echoed in my head like a bell being struck. $80,000. Our retirement cushion. The money Bernard had worked overtime for. The money I'd saved by clipping coupons and buying store brands for 30 years. Gone. In 3 transactions spread across 3 weeks. "All checks?" I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "Yes, ma'am. All checks. Signed by your husband." I closed my eyes for a moment. October 3rd. Bernard couldn't hold a spoon on October 3rd. I remember because I fed him applesauce that morning, and half of it ended up on his chin, and he looked at me with such embarrassment that I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I just wiped his face and told him it was fine. Everything was fine. "That's not possible," I said. "My husband was on hospice in October. He could barely hold a pen." Danielle's clicking stopped. She looked at me, then back at her screen, then at me again. "Mrs. Whitmore, I wasn't the one who processed these transactions, but I can see the notes in the system." She lowered her voice. "There was a man who came in with your husband each time. Tall, dark hair, said he was the son. The teller noted that he assisted with the signatures." "Assisted?" "Guided the hand." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Guided the hand. As if Bernard was a child learning to write his name for the first time. As if my husband of 46 years needed his own son to teach him how to sign a check. "Is that legal?" I asked. Danielle's face told me everything her mouth wouldn't say. "Mrs. Whitmore, if you have concerns about these transactions, you might want to speak with an attorney." I thanked her. She printed the statements for me. I folded them carefully and put them in my purse, next to Clayton's letter, next to the wallet that still had Bernard's old library card in it, because I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. When I got to my car, I sat in the parking lot for a long time. The engine was off. The windows fogged up from my breathing. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel. The same hands that had held Bernard's face when he was scared, that had wiped his tears, that had signed the hospice paperwork because he couldn't do it himself. He couldn't do it himself. That was the whole point. And Clayton knew that. He counted on it. I need to tell you about the kissing, because that's where this story really starts, even though I didn't know it at the time. Clayton stopped kissing me about 10 years ago. I don't mean the romantic kind. I mean the kind sons give their mothers. The quick peck on the cheek when they arrive, the goodbye kiss at the door. He just stopped doing it one day, and I noticed. But I didn't say anything, because what do you say? "Why won't you kiss me anymore?" Sounds pathetic, Sounds like begging. I told myself it was a phase. He was busy with work, stressed about money, distracted by his own kids. Men get distant sometimes. It doesn't mean anything. But then Bernard got sick. And suddenly, Clayton was at the house every week, sometimes twice a week. And every single time, he'd wrap his arms around his father and hold him for a long moment. He'd kiss the top of Bernard's head, careful of the thinning hair. He'd say things like, "Love you, Dad," in a voice thick with emotion. I cried the first time I saw it. Actually cried. I thought, he's finally understanding. He's finally seeing what matters. My boy is coming back to us. He wasn't coming back. He was coming for something else entirely. I just didn't know it yet. See? Clayton knew where Bernard kept the checkbooks. He knew where the account numbers were, which drawer held the statements, where the safe deposit key was hidden. He knew all of it because Bernard had told him years ago, back when my husband thought our son was the kind of man who could be trusted with such things. I was asleep at the switch for so long. That's the phrase that keeps coming back to me now. Asleep at the switch. Like a train conductor who doesn't see the danger coming until the crash is already happening. While I was sitting by Bernard's bed reading him old letters we'd written each other during his army days, Clayton was in the other room, going through files. While I was helping the hospice nurse change Bernard's sheets, Clayton was making phone calls. While I was crying in the bathroom because watching your husband disappear piece by piece is the loneliest kind of grief there is, Clayton was planning his inheritance early. And the hugs. God, the hugs. Every visit, he'd embrace his father like he was trying to memorize the feeling. I thought it was love. It was reconnaissance. I should tell you what kind of family we were before all this, because otherwise you might think we were always broken. We weren't. Not at the start. Not for most of it, really. You want to know what I remember most about falling in love with Bernard? It wasn't some grand romantic gesture. It was the way he listened. Most men back then, and probably now too, listened with one ear while planning what they'd say next. Bernard listened with his whole body. He'd lean forward, nod at the right moments, ask questions that showed he was actually paying attention. First time I told him about my father dying when I was 12, he didn't try to fix it or compare it to his own sorrows. He just said, "That must have been so hard for you." And he meant it. I could tell. We got married in 1978. Small wedding, backyard ceremony. His mother made the cake. He was a machinist at a factory that doesn't exist anymore, and I worked as a secretary at an insurance company until Clayton was born. Then I stayed home for 12 years until Renee was old enough for school and went back to work part-time at a dentist's office. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We were the kind of people who checked prices at the grocery store, but didn't have to count pennies to pay the electric bill. Clayton was our firstborn. You know how that is. Everything he did was a miracle. First smile, first word, first step. I have boxes of photographs documenting every moment of his childhood, like he was a celebrity instead of a regular kid from a regular family in a regular town. He was a beautiful baby, then a beautiful toddler, then the kind of little boy strangers stopped to admire in grocery stores. "What a handsome child," they'd say. And I'd beam like I'd done something special just by giving birth to him. Maybe that was part of the problem. We treated him like he was special from day one, like the rules that applied to other children didn't quite apply to him. I remember one Christmas. He must have been 7 or 8. He opened his presents faster than any of the other kids, then sat there with a pile of toys and wrapping paper around him, already bored. "Is that all?" he asked. Not with malice, exactly. Just genuine disappointment that the moment was over, that there wasn't more. Bernard laughed it off. Kids got high expectations, he said. Nothing wrong with that. But I remember catching Renee's eye across the room. She was maybe 3 years old, still playing happily with the box her toy came in, not even interested in the toy itself. She didn't need more. She was grateful for what she had. I should have paid more attention to that moment, to what it was telling me about both of them. He was a difficult teenager, but aren't they all? Slammed doors, eye rolls, the occasional shouting match about curfews. Nothing unusual. He went to college. We paid for most of it, took out a second mortgage on the house, and came back with a business degree and a chip on his shoulder about how we didn't understand the real world. He got married at 28, divorced at 35, married again at 39. The second wife, Tina, is fine. I don't know her well enough to say more than that. She's fine. She makes him happy, or at least she makes him calm, which might be the same thing after a certain age. Renee came along 4 years after Clayton. She was always easier, somehow. More patient, more thoughtful. The kind of child who said please and thank you without being reminded, who shared her toys without being asked, who cried when other children got hurt as if she could feel their pain in her own body. I used to worry about that, actually, her sensitivity. I thought the world would chew her up and spit her out, a girl that soft. But softness isn't the same as weakness, and Renee proved that over and over as she grew up. She had a core of steel under all that gentleness. She just didn't advertise it the way her brother did. She worked her way through college waiting tables because we'd used up so much on Clayton's education. 4 years of late nights and sore feet and difficult customers, all so she could get a degree without putting us further into debt. She never complained about it, not once. But I've always carried guilt about that. We gave her brother more than we gave her, and we told ourselves it was just timing, just circumstances. But looking back, I'm not so sure. Maybe we gave Clayton more because he demanded more. Maybe Renee got less because she never asked. There's a lesson there somewhere about which behaviors get rewarded in families, but I'm not sure I like what it teaches. The thing is, I love them both. I still do, even now. Even after everything. That's what makes this so hard. You can't unlove your children. You can be furious at them, disappointed in them, ashamed of them. But the love doesn't go away. It just sits there in your chest like a stone, heavy and permanent, and you have to learn to carry it even when it hurts. After Bernard retired, we had a good life. Not exciting, not glamorous, but good. We traveled a little, Florida in the winters, a cruise to Alaska for our 40th anniversary. We played cards with friends on Saturday nights. We watched our grandchildren grow up, sent them birthday checks, kept their drawings on our refrigerator. I gave Clayton money over the years. More than I should have, probably. $15,000 for the down payment on his first house, because he said he couldn't qualify for a mortgage without it. Another $10,000 when his business venture failed and he needed to pay off investors. $5,000 here, $3,000 there, always for emergencies that somehow only happened to him and never to his sister. There was the time his car broke down and he needed a new one right away. $3,000. The time his second wife wanted to redo the kitchen and he was already stretched thin. $8,000. The time his kids needed new school clothes and private tutoring and sports equipment and 100 other things that added up to more than I wanted to count. Each time, I told myself it was the last time. Each time, another crisis would appear, and Clayton would call with that particular tone in his voice. Half apologetic, half certain I would say yes, and I would feel my resolve crumbling before he even finished asking. Bernard called it investing in family. I called it helping our son. Neither of us called it what it really was, a pattern a habit Clayton had developed of seeing us as a safety net instead of parents. An expectation that we would always catch him, no matter how many times he jumped. I don't regret the money. Not most of it, anyway. What I regret is not seeing how it changed him. How each time we said yes, he learned that asking was enough, that he didn't need to earn or wait or do without. That we would always be there with open hands. When Bernard got his diagnosis, pancreatic cancer, the kind that moves fast and doesn't care how good a person you were, I thought about money differently. I thought about what we'd saved, what we'd need for his care, what would be left for me after. I thought about it practically, the way women do when they've spent their whole lives making sure there's enough. The hospital became our second home those last months. I learned the layout like I'd learned the layout of our house, where the bathrooms were, which vending machine had the freshest coffee, which elevator was quietest so Bernard could nap during transfers. I memorized the names of the nurses, the schedule of the doctors, the rhythm of the machines that beeped and hummed around his bed. He got thinner every week. His cheeks hollowed out. His wedding ring started sliding off his finger, so I put it on a chain around my neck for safekeeping. "You hold on to that for me," he said, one of his lucid days. "Give it back when I'm better." We both knew he wasn't going to get better, but we said things like that anyway. Hope is sometimes the only currency you have left. The morphine started in September. By October, he was on a drip most of the time. The pain was bad. Pancreatic cancer is one of the cruel ones, and the morphine was the only thing that touched it. But it took him away from me in pieces. Some days he knew who I was, knew where he was, could hold a conversation about the weather or the grandkids or what was happening in the news. Other days, he looked right through me like I was a stranger who'd wandered into his room by mistake. Those were the hardest days. Harder than the crying. Harder than the pain. Harder than anything except the end itself. Looking into the eyes of the man you've loved for 46 years and seeing nothing there that recognizes you. Bernard and I talked about it once, maybe twice. He wanted me to be comfortable. He didn't want me worrying about bills or selling the house or depending on the kids for anything. "You take care of yourself first," he said. "The kids are fine. They're grown. They've got their own lives." He meant it. I know he did. Bernard wasn't the kind of man to say things he didn't mean, especially not at the end, when every word cost him breath he couldn't spare. So when Clayton tells me that Bernard wanted him to have that money, wanted him to have it instead of me, I know it's a lie. Not because I'm stubborn or in denial, because I was there. I was there every single day, every single night for 3 months. I heard everything Bernard said, and he never, not once, said anything about giving $80,000 to our son. The day after I went to the bank, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into Bernard's study, the little room off the hallway where he used to pay bills and read the newspaper, and I opened his filing cabinet. It was all still there, exactly the way he'd left it. Folders labeled in his neat handwriting, taxes, insurance, medical, important documents. I hadn't touched any of it since he died. Couldn't bring myself to. It felt like disturbing a grave, but I needed answers, so I disturbed it. In the folder marked Will, I found a draft. Not the official one, that was with the lawyer, but an earlier version Bernard had written by hand, dated about a year before he got sick. I recognized his handwriting, the careful loops of his capital letters, the way he always pressed too hard with the pen. To Vivian, the house and all remaining savings. To Clayton and Renee, $40,000 each to be distributed after Vivian's passing. After my passing, not while I was still alive. Not while I was still here, needing that money, counting on it, He wanted me taken care of first. The kids would get their share eventually when I didn't need it anymore. Clayton didn't wait for eventually. He took his share and his sister's share, while his father was dying and his mother was too exhausted and grief-stricken to notice. I sat on the floor of Bernard's study with that paper in my hands, and for the first time since finding the letter, I felt something other than shock. I felt angry. Not the hot, explosive kind of angry that makes you throw things or scream. The cold kind. The kind that settles into your bones and doesn't go away. The kind that makes you very, very quiet because you're saving your energy for what comes next. He robbed Peter to pay himself. That's an old expression my grandmother used to use. It means taking from one place to cover another, shuffling money around like a con artist with 3 cups and a ball. But in this case, Clayton didn't even bother with the cups. He just reached into his dying father's pocket and took what he wanted. I called Clayton the next evening. I waited until after dinner, after I'd washed the dishes and wiped down the counters and done all the small, ordinary things that keep you from falling apart. Then I sat in the living room, in the chair Bernard used to favor, and I dialed my son's number. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" He sounded normal, relaxed, like nothing in the world was wrong. "I found the bank statements, Clayton." Silence. Not a long one, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but long enough for me to know he understood exactly what I was talking about. "Okay," he said slowly. And I want to know what happened. $80,000, 3 checks. Your father couldn't hold a spoon in October, but he signed 3 checks? I heard him exhale, the kind of breath people take when they're annoyed, when they've been caught and they're trying to figure out how to spin it. "Mom, Dad wanted me to have that money. We talked about it. He was worried you'd, I don't know, give it all away to some charity or let Renee guilt you into something. He wanted it protected." "Protected," I repeated. "By giving it to you." He trusted me. The lie was so smooth, so confident, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. That's the thing about Clayton. He's always been good at sounding reasonable, at making you feel like you're the one who's confused. But I'd just read Bernard's handwriting. I'd just held the proof in my own hands. He couldn't sign those checks, Clayton. He was on morphine. He didn't know where he was half the time. He had good days and bad days. You weren't always there. That one hurt. It was meant to. "I was there every day," I said, and my voice cracked a little, which I hated. Every single day. I slept in that hospital chair until my back was permanently bent. I was there when he couldn't remember my name, when he called me by his mother's name, when he cried because he didn't know why he was hurting. "Don't you dare tell me I wasn't there." "Mom, you're getting upset over nothing. Dad wanted—" "Stop," I said. "Stop telling me what Dad wanted. I know what he wanted. I was his wife for 46 years. I know." Clayton was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge to it, something harder. "What are you going to do, Mom? Call the police. Tell them your son stole from you. You really want to go down that road?" "I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but I wanted you to know that I know. I wanted you to understand that I'm not confused, I'm not senile, and I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. You're being dramatic. And you're being a thief." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else. From finally saying out loud what I'd been thinking for 2 days. From hearing my own voice, steady and clear, calling the thing what it was. My son stole from me. from his father, from his family, and he didn't even have the decency to sound ashamed. The next few days were strange. I went through the motions of my regular life: grocery shopping, watering my plants, meeting a friend for coffee. But none of it felt real. It was like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my body, going through the actions without actually being present. I kept finding myself in Bernard's study, looking at his things. His reading glasses were still on the desk. I picked them up and put them in my pocket, and I've carried them with me ever since. I don't know why. They don't do anything, but having them close makes me feel like he's still here somehow, still seeing things with me, still helping me understand what I'm supposed to do next. I thought a lot about the last months of his life. The visits from Clayton. The hugs and the kisses and the "I love you, Dad" that I'd found so moving at the time. There was one afternoon, I remember it clearly now, when Clayton came by while the hospice nurse was changing Bernard's IV. Bernard hated having the IV changed. It hurt and it scared him, and sometimes he'd cry out even though he tried not to. I always stayed with him, held his hand, talked him through it. But Clayton would leave. Every time. He'd say he needed to smoke, or he had a phone call, or he had to check on something in his car. And I'd think, he can't bear to see his father suffer. It's too hard for him. He loves his dad too much to watch this. Now I understand differently. He wasn't leaving because he couldn't bear it. He was leaving because he had things to do. Papers to find, plans to make. The suffering was just an opportunity he didn't want to waste. I feel stupid admitting that. Stupid for not seeing it sooner. But grief does strange things to your brain. It makes you want to believe the best about people, especially your own children. It makes you interpret everything through a lens of love because the alternative is too painful to consider. Well, I'm considering it now. I called Renee on a Tuesday morning. She lives about 3 hours away, close enough to visit, but far enough that it doesn't happen as often as either of us would like. "Mom, is everything okay? You never call this early." I looked at the clock. It was barely 7:30. Renee was probably getting ready for work, probably had her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, probably was running through her mental list of everything she needed to do that day. "I need to tell you something," I said. "And I need you to just listen until I'm finished." She went quiet. "Okay." So I told her, all of it. The letter, the bank statements, the conversation with Clayton, the draft of Bernard's will. I told her about the hugs and the disappearing during the IV changes, and the way Clayton had looked me in the eye and told me I wasn't always there. I talked for maybe 15 minutes without stopping, and she didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Mom," Renee finally said, and her voice was thick. "I got that letter." "What?" "Clayton sent it to my real address, too, a few weeks after Dad died. I don't know what I thought. I told myself it must be some kind of misunderstanding, that Clayton was exaggerating, or that Dad really had given him the money somehow. I didn't want to believe." She trailed off. I could hear her breathing, uneven and shaky. "You didn't tell me," I said. "I know. I'm sorry. I thought you had enough to deal with. I thought if I ignored it, it would go away. That Clayton would come to his senses or give the money back or something." She laughed bitterly. "That sounds so stupid now." "It's not stupid. It's hope. We both had it." "What are you going to do?" I looked around my kitchen, the worn countertops, The window over the sink, where I could see Bernard's bird feeder in the backyard, still filled because I couldn't bring myself to let it go empty. I'm going to talk to a lawyer. Renee exhaled. Good. That's good, Mom. You should. You're not going to tell me I'm overreacting? That I should let it go for the sake of family peace? No, she said firmly. What Clayton did wasn't about family, it was about money. And if we pretend otherwise, we're just helping him get away with it. My daughter, the one who got less from us, worked harder, asked for nothing. The one who was now standing with me against her own brother. I love you, I said. I love you too, Mom. Call the lawyer. I'll help however I can. She gave me a name before we hung up. A woman she'd heard about through a friend at work, someone who specialized in cases like this. Elder financial exploitation, Renee called it. There's a legal term for what Clayton did, an ugly term for an ugly thing. The lawyer's name was Patricia Callahan. She had an office in a small building downtown, the kind with a creaky elevator and worn carpet that probably hadn't been replaced since the 80s. The walls were lined with law books that looked like they'd actually been read, not just displayed for show. I liked that about her office. It felt lived in, honest. I liked her immediately. She was about my age, maybe a few years younger, with gray hair she didn't bother to dye, and reading glasses that she pushed up on her head when she wasn't using them. She had the kind of face that had seen things. Not hard, exactly, but knowing. The face of someone who'd heard a lot of sad stories and learned not to flinch at them. There was a photograph on her desk of two grown children, a boy and a girl, both smiling in graduation robes. I wondered briefly if she ever worried about them the way I worried about Clayton. If she ever lay awake at night wondering if she'd made mistakes, if she'd done something wrong somewhere along the way. Probably not. Probably her kids turned out fine. Most kids do. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, shaking my hand. Tell me what happened. So I told her again. The whole story, from the letter to the bank statements, to the phone call with Clayton. I showed her the documents I'd brought. Copies of everything, because Renee had told me to make copies before I showed anyone the originals. Patricia listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me over her glasses. What your son did has a name, she said. It's called undue influence over an incapacitated person. It's a form of elder financial exploitation. If what the bank employee told you is accurate, that he was guiding your husband's hand, that's not a valid signature. Your husband didn't sign those checks. Your son did, using your husband's hand as a tool. I'd known it, of course. But hearing it put into legal terms made it real in a different way. What can I do? You can file a civil lawsuit to recover the funds. Depending on what we find, there may also be grounds for criminal charges, though that would be up to the district attorney. She paused. I have to ask you, Mrs. Whitmore, are you prepared for what this will mean? Your son will have to respond. There will be depositions, possibly a trial. It won't be pleasant. I'm 73 years old, I said. I've buried my husband, raised 2 children, and worked my whole life to have something to leave behind. I'm not looking for pleasant. I'm looking for justice. Patricia smiled. It was a small smile, a careful one, but it was real. Then let's get started. Clayton showed up at my house unannounced the following week. I was in the kitchen, making myself lunch, just a sandwich, nothing fancy, when I heard the front door open. I hadn't given him a key, but Bernard had, years ago, and I'd never thought to ask for it back. He walked in like he still owned the place, like nothing had changed. Mom, We need to talk. I set down the butter knife and turned to face him. He was wearing his work clothes, dress shirt, slacks, the kind of outfit that's supposed to make you look successful. His hair was graying at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there a few years ago. He looked tired, which surprised me. I hadn't thought about how this might be affecting him. I hadn't wanted to. You could have knocked, I said. I'm your son. I shouldn't have to knock. And yet, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, Renee told me you're talking to lawyers. This is insane, Mom. You're going to drag our family through the mud over a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding, Clayton. It's $80,000. Dad wanted me to have it. Stop saying that. We both know it's not true. He stepped closer and I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not guilt. Frustration. The look of someone who's annoyed that their plan isn't working. You're grieving, he said, softening his voice. You're confused. This is what happens when old people lose their spouses. They get paranoid. They start seeing betrayal everywhere. I've read about it. It's a normal part of the process. Don't, I said quietly. Don't what? Don't talk to me like I'm a child. Don't try to make me think I'm crazy. I'm not grieving myself into paranoia, Clayton. I'm seeing clearly for the first time in years. Mom? I was asleep at the switch, I said. That's a phrase your grandmother used to use. It means I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't seeing what was right in front of me. All those years of bailing you out, giving you money, making excuses for why you needed more help than your sister. I told myself I was being a good mother, but I was just making it easier for you to take and take and take. He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. And then your father got sick, and you saw your chance. You knew he couldn't say no. You knew he couldn't tell me what was happening. So you took him to the bank, and you put his hand on checks he couldn't read, and you stole from your own family while we were all too busy watching him die to notice. Clayton's face had gone red. That's not... He played me for a fool and didn't even blink, I said. That's what I keep thinking. Every time I remember those hugs, those I love you, Dad moments, you were playing a role, putting on a show. And I fell for it because I wanted so badly to believe my son was a good man. I am a good man. Good men don't steal from dying fathers. The room was very quiet. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the tick of the clock in the hallway, the faint sound of traffic from the street outside. All the ordinary sounds of ordinary life going on around us like nothing was happening. Clayton's jaw tightened. If you go through with this, he said, if you file some ridiculous lawsuit against me, I will make sure everyone knows the truth. The truth about what? About you. About how you've been since Dad died. Confused, forgetful, irrational. I'll talk to the grandkids, explain that their grandmother has problems. That she can't be trusted. I looked at my son. This man I had carried in my body, nursed at my breast, comforted through nightmares and scraped knees and teenage heartbreaks. I looked at him, and I felt something shift inside me. Something final. Try it, I said. See how that works out for you. He stared at me for a long moment, clearly expecting me to back down, to apologize, to do what I'd always done before. Smooth things over, keep the peace, sacrifice my own needs for the sake of family harmony. I didn't. After a moment, he turned and walked out. The door slammed behind him, rattling the pictures on the wall. I stood in my kitchen alone, my half-made sandwich on the counter, my hands steady at my sides. The house was quiet again. But it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine.
Dad wanted me to have it, not you. That's what he said to his own mother, a widow, about money he took while his father was on morphine and couldn't even hold a pen. What kind of son says that?
That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed Bernard and I had shared for 43 years. We'd bought a new mattress when we moved, but the bed frame was the same. And I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment. The house made its familiar nighttime sounds around me. The creak of the floorboards settling, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs, the occasional car passing on the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the ceiling before disappearing. All the sounds I'd grown so used to over the decades that I usually didn't hear them at all. Tonight, they were loud. Tonight, everything was loud except the one voice I wanted to hear. I reached across the bed to Bernard's side, the way I still did sometimes, forgetting for just a second that he wasn't there. My hand touched cold sheets, and the absence hit me all over again, fresh as the first morning I'd woken up alone. "What do I do?" I whispered into the dark. "What would you want me to do?" The silence didn't answer. It never did. But I kept asking anyway, because 46 years of marriage doesn't end just because one person stops breathing. The conversation continues, one-sided, forever. I thought about the first time I held Clayton, minutes after he was born, when he was red and wrinkled and screaming and absolutely perfect. I thought about teaching him to ride a bike, sitting up with him when he had the flu, driving him to college and crying the whole way home because the house felt so empty without him. I thought about all the checks I'd written over the years. All the times I'd told Bernard, "He needs help. We have to help him." All the dinners where I'd bitten my tongue when Clayton said something careless or cruel, because keeping peace was what mothers did. Had I made him this way? That was the question that kept me awake. Had I raised a thief by never letting him fail? By always being there with my wallet open and my heart on my sleeve? I didn't know. I might never know. But I was starting to understand that it didn't matter. Clayton was 48 years old. Whatever I had or hadn't done when he was a child, he was a grown man now. He made his own choices, and he had to live with them. So did I. Around 3 a.m, I got out of bed and went to Bernard's study. I turned on the small lamp on his desk and sat in his chair and looked at all the things he'd left behind. The books he'd never finished reading. The letters I'd written him during his army days, saved in a shoebox tied with string. The photograph of our wedding day, both of us so young and hopeful and completely unaware of what the next 46 years would bring. I took his reading glasses out of my pocket and held them up to the light. They were smudged, like they always were, because he never remembered to clean them properly. I used the hem of my nightgown to wipe them off, the way I'd done 1,000 times before. "What would you do?" I asked him. "If you were here, if you knew what he did." Bernard didn't answer, of course, but I could imagine what he'd say. He was never a man who yelled or made dramatic speeches. He just did what needed to be done, quietly and steadily, without making a fuss. "You'd want me to fight," I said. "You'd want me to stand up for myself." The house creaked around me, settling in the cold. Outside, a car drove past, its headlights briefly illuminating the window. I put the glasses back in my pocket and went back to bed. I still didn't sleep, but the quiet felt different now, less like loneliness, more like resolve. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and phone calls and meetings with Patricia. She was thorough, methodical, unflappable. She gathered evidence like a woman building a case brick by brick. The bank statements, the draft of Bernard's will, medical records showing his condition in October, testimony from the hospice nurses about his mental state. And then there was the bank employee. Her name was Michelle. She'd been working at the branch for only 6 months when Clayton brought Bernard in to sign those checks. She was young, inexperienced, and, by her own admission, too intimidated to say anything when she saw a son helping his elderly father with paperwork. "I knew something was wrong," she told Patricia during her deposition. Mr. Whitmore barely seemed aware of where he was. His son did most of the talking, and when it came time to sign, his son took his hand and guided it. I should have said something. I should have called my manager. But the son kept saying it was fine, that his father just had tremors, that this was normal for them. "Why didn't you report it?" Patricia asked. Michelle looked down at her hands. "I don't know. I was new. I didn't want to make trouble. And the son seemed so confident, like everything was completely normal. I told myself I was overreacting." I watched her face as she spoke. She was maybe 25, pretty in a nervous sort of way, with dark hair she kept tucking behind her ear. She looked miserable, ashamed, like she'd been carrying this weight for months and was finally allowed to set it down. "You're helping now," I told her after the deposition. "That's what matters." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry. If you were doing your job. My son was the one who broke the rules, not you." She nodded, wiping her eyes, and I realized something. I'd spent so long being angry at Clayton that I'd almost forgotten there were other people caught up in this mess. People who saw something wrong and didn't know how to stop it. People who would carry their own guilt forever because they hadn't been brave enough to speak up. I didn't blame Michelle. I couldn't. She was young and scared and doing the best she could in a situation she'd never been trained for. The only person I blamed was Clayton. The lawsuit moved forward. Patricia filed the paperwork, Clayton was served, and suddenly it was real in a way it hadn't been before. My son was a defendant in a case I'd brought against him. Our family's dirty laundry was about to be spread across court documents and legal briefs for anyone to see. Clayton's lawyer, a slick man named Harris who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, reached out to Patricia with an offer. "They want to settle," Patricia told me over the phone. $40,000. No admission of wrongdoing. The whole thing goes away. $40,000, I repeated. "That's half." "Yes. And no admission of wrongdoing." So Clayton gets to pretend he didn't do anything wrong. That's the idea. I was sitting in my living room, the same room where I'd raised my children, celebrated holidays, mourned my husband. The afternoon light was coming through the windows, making patterns on the carpet. "No," I said. "Are you sure? Trials are expensive, Mrs. Whitmore. They're exhausting. There's no guarantee we'll win." "I don't care about winning. I care about the truth." I took a breath. I want the full amount, and I want it on the record. I want there to be paperwork somewhere that says what he did. Not a quiet settlement. Not a handshake deal. A record. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "You understand this could take months, maybe longer. I'm 73. I've got nothing but time." She laughed softly. "All right, Mrs. Whitmore. We'll see them in court." The next few months were hard in ways I hadn't expected. Not because of the legal process. Patricia handled most of that, calling me only when she needed information or signatures. The hard part was everything else. Renee called every week, sometimes more. She was my rock through all of it, steady and supportive and furious on my behalf. She'd drive 3 hours just to have dinner with me, just to sit in my kitchen and talk about nothing important, just to remind me that I wasn't alone in this, that I still had family who loved me the right way. She helped me sort through financial documents, accompanied me to depositions, sat with me on difficult nights when the weight of everything felt too heavy to carry alone. She never once suggested I drop the case. Never once hinted that I should forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. She understood, maybe better than I did at first, that some things can't be forgiven. Not because forgiveness is impossible, but because pretending everything is fine would be a different kind of lie. "You're doing the right thing," she told me over and over. "I know it's hard, but you're doing the right thing." The grandchildren were harder. Clayton had 2 kids from his second marriage, Thomas, who was 15, and Meredith, who was 12. I'd been part of their lives since they were born. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, summer afternoons at my house eating popsicles on the back porch. Thomas was a quiet boy, thoughtful in ways that reminded me of Bernard. He liked building things, models mostly, but also little contraptions out of cardboard and tape that never quite worked the way he planned, but showed imagination. I used to buy him model kits for Christmas, spend afternoons helping him glue tiny pieces together while we talked about school and friends and whatever else was on his mind. Meredith was different, loud and energetic, always moving, always talking. She reminded me of Clayton at that age, actually. Before whatever went wrong. She'd burst into my house demanding cookies and stories and attention, and I'd give her all of it gladly, because that's what grandmothers do. That's what grandmothers live for. The thought of losing them, of Clayton poisoning their minds against me, kept me up more nights than I want to admit. I'd lie in bed replaying conversations I might have with them someday, explanations I might offer, defenses I might need to mount. What do you tell children about betrayal? How do you explain that the father they love did something terrible to the grandmother who loves them? I never found good answers to those questions. I'm not sure good answers exist. After the lawsuit was filed, the invitations stopped coming. Clayton must have told them something, though I didn't know what. Renee said the kids seemed confused when she saw them at a family event, asking vague questions about why Grandma was being difficult. I wanted to call them, explain my side. But what do you say to a teenager about why you're suing their father? Your dad stole money from your dying grandfather isn't the kind of thing you can put in a birthday card. So I waited. Sent cards for their birthdays anyway, even though I didn't know if they received them. Wrote letters I wasn't sure were being read. Told myself that eventually, when they were older, they'd understand. They'd know the truth. It was a thin comfort, but it was all I had. Frank called me on a Saturday afternoon. Frank Moretti, Bernard's oldest friend from his days at the factory. They'd worked together for 30 years, retired within months of each other, spent every Tuesday morning playing chess at the park until Bernard got too sick to leave the house. "Vivian," he said, his voice gruff the way older men's voices get when they're trying not to sound emotional. "Renee told me what's going on with Clayton." "Yes," I said. "It's been a lot. I wanted to tell you something about Bernard, about those last months." I sat down, suddenly very aware of my own heartbeat. "What is it?" He talked to me a few weeks before the end. He was lucid that day, more than he'd been in a while. And he said, Frank paused, and I heard him swallow hard. He said he was worried about you. He said, "Frank, make sure Viv is okay. Make sure nobody takes advantage of her." Those were his words. Make sure nobody takes advantage of her. I closed my eyes. Bernard's face swam up in my memory, the way he looked in those last weeks. Thin, tired, his eyes cloudy from the medication, but still, sometimes, achingly clear. He never said anything to me about giving Clayton money, Frank continued. Never. And I saw him every week until he couldn't see anyone anymore. If he'd wanted that, he would have told me. He told me everything else. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me, just win. That boy, I'm sorry, Vivian, I know he's your son. But that boy did a terrible thing, and Bernard would want you to fight. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I will. I am. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what Frank had said. Make sure nobody takes advantage of her. Those were Bernard's words. His final wish passed to his oldest friend because he knew somewhere in his failing body and clouded mind that he might not be able to protect me himself. Well, I was protecting myself now. Better late than never. The trial was scheduled for early spring. Patricia spent months preparing, building our case piece by piece. The bank employee's testimony, the hospice records, Frank's statement about Bernard's wishes, financial experts who could explain exactly how the transactions were processed and exactly why they shouldn't have been. The courthouse was old, the kind of building with high ceilings and echoing hallways that makes you feel small just walking through it. I wore my navy coat again, the one Bernard liked, and a simple gold necklace he'd given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look respectable, but more than that, I wanted to feel close to him, like he was there with me, even though he wasn't. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cleaning supplies. I sat in the front row behind Patricia's table, my purse on my lap, my hands folded exactly the way I'd held them in the bank manager's office all those months ago. Some habits don't change, even when everything else does. Clayton sat at the defense table with his lawyer, a slick man named Harris, who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. I tried not to look at my son too much. Every time I did, I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee, and it made everything harder than it already was. Clayton's lawyer tried everything. He claimed Bernard had verbally authorized the transfers. He produced a document, typed, not handwritten, supposedly showing that Bernard wanted Clayton to have the money. He argued that I was confused by grief and misremembering my husband's wishes. None of it stuck. Patricia dismantled each argument methodically, like a surgeon removing a tumor. She showed that the typed document was dated 3 days after Bernard lost the ability to operate a computer. She demonstrated that the bank's own records showed irregularities in the signature process. She presented testimony from Bernard's doctors about his mental state in October, making it clear that he couldn't have knowingly agreed to anything. And through it all, I sat in the courtroom and watched my son. I watched him squirm, deny, deflect. I watched him look everywhere but at me, as if pretending I wasn't there would make this all go away. On the 3rd day of the trial, Patricia called me to the stand. I'd practiced my testimony dozens of times, but nothing prepares you for actually being up there, under the lights, with your son sitting at the defense table and a room full of strangers watching. Mrs. Whitmore, Patricia said, can you describe your husband's condition in October of last year? I looked at the jury. 12 ordinary people, some around my age, some younger. They all looked tired. Courtrooms are exhausting places. He was dying, I said simply. The cancer had spread to his liver and his bones. He was on a morphine drip most of the time. He couldn't feed himself. Some days he didn't know my name. Did he ever express a wish to give large sums of money to your son during this period? No, never. Did you ever see him sign any documents during this time? He couldn't sign anything. His hands shook too badly. I had to sign his hospice paperwork because he couldn't hold the pen. And yet, Patricia said, turning slightly toward the jury, bank records show that checks totaling $80,000 were signed by your husband during this very period. How do you explain that? I looked at Clayton then, really looked at him for the first time since the trial started. He was staring at the table in front of him, his jaw tight, his hands clasped so hard his knuckles were white. My son forged those signatures, I said. He took his father to the bank and he held his hand and he made him sign checks that my husband could barely see, let alone understand. My son stole from his dying father. And then he stole from me. The room was very quiet. I could hear someone in the gallery whisper something, could hear the scratch of the court reporter's keys. No further questions, Patricia said. Clayton's lawyer tried to rattle me on cross-examination. He asked about my memory, my emotional state, whether I'd had disagreements with my son in the past. I answered every question calmly, clearly, without raising my voice or losing my temper. Mrs. Whitmore, he said finally, isn't it possible that you're just angry at your son for receiving an inheritance you feel should have been yours? I thought about that question for a moment before answering. I'm not angry about the money, I said. I'm angry about the betrayal. I'm angry that my son looked at his dying father and saw a business opportunity. I'm angry that he lied to me, manipulated me, and then tried to make me think I was crazy for seeing the truth. I paused. The money is just the evidence. The crime was much bigger than that. The lawyer had no response. He sat down, and I stepped off the stand. And for the first time in months, I felt like I'd finally said what needed to be said. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days of waiting, of pacing my living room, of jumping every time the phone rang. When the verdict came, I was sitting in Renee's kitchen, 3 hours from home, because I couldn't stand being alone anymore. The waiting was unbearable. Every hour felt like a week. I paced her house, rearranged her throw pillows, washed dishes that were already clean. Renee let me, didn't say a word about it, just made tea and sat with me and let the silence be what it needed to be. The phone rang at 3:47 in the afternoon. I'll remember that time for the rest of my life. They found in your favor, Patricia said over the phone. Full restitution. The judge is also recommending that the case be reviewed for potential criminal charges. For a moment, the words didn't make sense. They were just sounds, floating somewhere outside my head. Then they landed all at once, and the room tilted slightly. I sat very still for a moment, trying to absorb what I'd just heard. Full restitution. We won. After all those months of paperwork and depositions and sleepless nights, we actually won. Mom? Renee was watching me from across the table, her face tight with anxiety. What is it? What did she say? We won, I said, and my voice sounded strange even to my own ears. Too quiet, too calm, like it was coming from very far away. We won. Renee stood up and wrapped her arms around me, and I let her hold me for a long time, longer than I'd let anyone hold me since Bernard died. I wasn't crying. I'd done enough crying to last several lifetimes. But something in me was loosening, releasing. Finally letting go of a tension I'd carried for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to not have it. It's over, Renee said. Not quite, I said. He still has to pay the money back, and there might be criminal charges. But the hard part is done. You did it, Mom. You stood up for yourself. I thought about that. Standing up. Such a simple phrase for such a complicated thing. I did, didn't I? The aftermath was strange. Not strange like a dream, more like walking through a familiar house where all the furniture has been moved 2 inches to the left. Everything looked almost right, but nothing felt quite the way it should. Clayton was ordered to repay the full $80,000, plus interest and legal fees. The district attorney decided not to pursue criminal charges. Something about the difficulty of prosecuting family financial cases. But the civil judgment would follow Clayton for the rest of his life. A permanent record of what he'd done. He didn't speak to me after the trial, didn't call, didn't write, didn't show up at my door. I heard from Renee that he was devastated, that his marriage was under strain, that he was telling everyone who would listen that I'd ruined his life. I ruined his life. That's what he said, as if the lawsuit was the crime and not what came before it. His children, my grandchildren, remained a gray area. Thomas sent me a text message a few weeks after the verdict. Just 3 words. I'm sorry, Grandma. I don't know what he was sorry for. For his father's actions. For the distance between us? For something else entirely? I texted back that I loved him, that I'd always love him, that none of this was his fault. He didn't respond, but I hope he read it. I hope he knew. Meredith sent me a birthday card the following month. Store-bought, generic, with just her name signed at the bottom. But inside, tucked between the card and the envelope, was a folded piece of paper. A drawing, a simple one like she used to make when she was younger, of 2 figures holding hands. One tall, one shorter. Underneath, in careful handwriting, "Still thinking of you." I kept that drawing. I put it in Bernard's study, next to his reading glasses and the photograph of our wedding day. Evidence that something good might still grow out of all this wreckage. It's been almost a year now since the trial. Time moves differently after something like this. Some days feel like weeks. Some weeks feel like hours. I'm still in the same house, still watering the same plants, still feeding the birds outside Bernard's window. Still carrying his reading glasses in my pocket like a talisman, even though I know they're just glass and metal, nothing magical about them at all. The money came back eventually, deposited in my account in installments, because Clayton claimed he didn't have the full amount available at once. Patricia said I could push for a lump sum, take him back to court, make things harder. I said no. The record was what mattered. The record existed. That was enough. I think about Clayton sometimes. Not with anger anymore, not really. More with a kind of sad bewilderment. How did this happen? How did the baby I held in my arms become a man who would steal from his dying father? Where did I go wrong, and where did he? I don't have answers. I'm not sure anyone does. What I have instead is a quiet house, a full bank account, and the knowledge that I didn't let it go, that I didn't swallow the betrayal and smile and pretend everything was fine, that I stood up even when it was hard, even when everyone told me to just let it go, just keep the peace, just be the bigger person. Being the bigger person is overrated. Sometimes you have to be the angry person, the stubborn person, the person who says, "No, you don't get to do this to me," not without a fight.
People told Vivian she was tearing the family apart. But I'll tell you something. That family was torn the moment her son walked into that bank with a dying man and a checkbook. She's not destroying anything. She's just putting down on paper what he already did. That's not revenge. That's the truth.
I went to Bernard's grave last week. I do that sometimes, when the house feels too quiet or when I need to talk to someone who won't talk back. The cemetery is about 20 minutes from the house, on a hill overlooking a small pond where ducks gather in the summer. Bernard would have liked that. He always liked watching birds. I brought flowers, daisies, his favorite. And I sat on the bench across from his headstone, and I told him everything. About the trial, the verdict, the slow unraveling of my relationship with our son. I told him things I hadn't told anyone else, things I'd kept locked up inside because saying them out loud made them too real. I'm angry, I said. Still, even after all this time. I thought winning would make the anger go away, but it didn't. It just sits there, like a rock in my shoe. I keep waiting for it to dissolve or something, but it doesn't. His headstone didn't answer, of course. It just sat there, gray and permanent, with his name and the dates and the words I'd chosen. Beloved husband and father. I wondered sometimes if I should have added something else. A joke, maybe. Bernard loved jokes, but death doesn't really leave room for humor, and anyway, it was too late now. I don't know if I did the right thing, I said. Some days I'm sure I did. Other days I wonder if it was worth it. If losing Clayton was worth getting the money back. The cemetery was empty except for me. A light wind rustled the leaves on the trees. Somewhere a bird was singing, probably one of the sparrows that live in the hedge near the entrance. But then I remember what you said to Frank, I continued. Make sure nobody takes advantage of her. That's what you wanted. You wanted me to be safe. And I am. I'm safe now. I sat there for a long time, watching the shadows move across the grass. The flowers I'd brought were already wilting a little in the heat, their petals curling at the edges. I miss you, I said finally. Every single day. But I'm going to be okay. I promise. I meant it. For the first time in a long time, I actually believed it. If you're reading this, if you've made it this far, I want you to know something. I didn't tell this story for sympathy. I didn't tell it to make Clayton look bad or to make myself look good. I told it because it's true, and because I spent too long not saying true things out loud. I keep thinking about other women like me. Women who lost their husbands and then discovered that someone they trusted was taking advantage of them. Women who were told they were confused, emotional, overreacting. Women who swallowed their anger because that's what good mothers do, what good grandmothers do, what good people do. You're not crazy. If something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. And you don't have to stay quiet about it. Not for anyone, not for any reason. I'm 73 years old. I've buried a husband, raised 2 children, and sued my own son in open court. I've lost things I'll never get back and found things I didn't know I had. And I'm still here, still standing, still waking up every morning and making my coffee and feeding my birds and living my life. Am I the only one who's been through something like this? The only widow who found out her child was stealing from her while she was too busy grieving to notice. The only mother who had to choose between peace and truth? I don't think so. I can't be the only one. If you know this weight, if you've carried it yourself, I'd like to hear from you. Not because I need validation. Not because I'm looking for someone to tell me I was right. Just because I need to know I'm not alone. That this really happened to other people, in other houses, other families. And that fighting back is possible, even when it's hard, even when everyone tells you not to, especially then.